Welcome to Desi Matters, the podcast where we amplify the voices and stories that shape the South Asian community. I'm your host, Kunal Patel, and in each episode, we dive deep into topics and issues that often go unheard, both within the broader society and even within our own communities. Today, we're talking about the subject that many of us are familiar with, but often in very different ways: fasting for religious reasons. Fasting is a practice that spans across many cultures and religions, including Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, and Jainism. But beyond the act of abstaining from food, there's a deep and spiritual, cultural, and even a personal dimension to fasting that we rarely explore in depth. Our guest today is someone who brings a unique perspective to this topic, Nimmi Shah. Nimmi is a Jain and professionally works as a finance director. Jainism, as many of you may know, places significant emphasis on non-violence and fasting. This plays a crucial role in the spiritual journey of many Jains. Nimmi is here to share her personal experiences with fasting, what it means to her both spiritually and culturally, and how she balances this practice with the demands of her professional life. Nimmi, welcome to Desi Matters. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, and it's a real privilege to be on it.
So let's start from the beginning. Can you share with us what fasting means in the Jain tradition and how this differs from other religious practice?
So in Jainism, there are two versions of it. There's the ones where people do not eat at all for 8 or 9 days. I take it to a slightly lesser extent, which is I will have one meal a day just before sunset. Also, Jainism, in the most sort of strictest sense, they don't eat anything that will harm any creatures. So that includes root vegetables, eggs, and things like that. So during this week, I will also give up crisps, cakes, all sorts of other things as well. So, it is quite tiring. The first couple of days, especially, do take a lot out of you, but then your body adjusts. I think spiritually it's very good because it is a detox, both sort of physically and mentally as well. I'd say it almost centers you. So I think it's really great in that sense. You'll have your meal. The people who are doing one meal a day will do that and then go to the community hall. And as you know, as a sort of Gujarati person, there'll be ras garba going on afterwards as well. So it's like you've just eaten, you're about to do ras garba straight afterwards.
That's great. Yeah. And how do you prepare yourself mentally and physically before starting a fast, especially during those more extended fasting periods?
So I think what I try and do is sort of educate people that I'm working with that it's happening. So I might, if I've got some important deadlines or something coming up, I will maybe even do a little bit over the weekend, but it's sort of to try and enforce the fast, to say, come about 4 o'clock, 4:30, it becomes quite difficult to be working. I need to go and eat, so let's go and do it. And it's also a time where you almost have extended family dinners together as well. So you'll all eat together, maybe slightly staggered so one person can serve you, because it's the physical thing is you sit down, you eat, and everything you can eat while you're sitting down. As soon as you get up, your fast is broken.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And Jainism is one of the oldest religions in the world, similar to Hinduism, which is the oldest religion in the world, dating back to more than 4,000 years ago. And even in Hinduism, which is a religion that I practice, there's a lot of religious fasting. And I guess both of the religions, Jainism and Hinduism, focus on this center point of Sanatan Dharma, which is a term that's kind of used in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, which all believe in kind of rebirth. And essentially, in Jainism, the emphasis is on the pursuit of non-violence
Yes.
and believing in the soul being rebirthed, and the concept that the world has a beginning and an end. And Sanatan Dharma in Hinduism refers to being a timeless, eternal set of truths, which is basically the divine truth. In other words, it's basically the eternal religion of law and the way of life. And the other part of it is within my own experiences in Hinduism, there's things like Ekadasi, which is, we call it Agyaras, which
Yeah.
is the literally meaning 11th day,
Yeah.
which is, for those that don't know, Ekadasi or Agyaras basically means 11th day, which is both Hinduism and Jainism follow the lunar calendar.
Yeah.
So it's basically the 11th day of the lunar cycle, which there are certain Hindus that fast on Ekadasi and what we call Agyaras.
Yeah.
And there's also Hindus that tend to fast on different days of the week. So, for example, Monday is particularly to those that are observing a fast to a certain god, which is Lord Shiva. And Tuesday and Saturday, I believe, are observations of the god Hanuman, the monkey god. And Friday, um, which my mum used to actually do many years ago, she used to fast on Friday, and that was to the goddess Lakshmi. So there are Hindus that fast for different days, different occasions. There's even religious festivals in all of that, which, for example, I mean, when you talk about religious festivals, there's Navratri, which is coming up, which means literally 9 nights. And the goddess Durga is celebrated in 9 separate nights, signifying the 9 avatars that she has taken. And during those days, basically, Hindus go and observe this by playing Garba and Dandiya. And we also do a fast during this period. And also the month of Shravan, which is kind of like July to August, we fast as well as Hindus. So I am a meat eater. So during that month, Hindus that eat meat or are non-vegetarian tend to be vegetarian. So there are also different variations of fasting in that regard. I've faced many challenges in my career when doing some of these fasts. People are kind of asking me, well, hey, how come you're not eating? So I have to give the reasoning and the religious explanations. But Nimi, have you ever faced any challenges or doubts during fasting, or people coming up to you and saying, hey, how come you're not eating? How did you overcome all of this?
So Paryushan, so it's a bit like Navratri in that sense. It is sort of eight days, and it it sort of comes up towards the end of it where you have because Mahavir is the last Tirthanka, but there were sort of 23 before them, starting from Rishabdev. So
Yeah,
there was all of the 24 Tirthankas, and towards the end of it, you're culminating with the sort of Mahavir's Mahavir Jayanti, where you kind of have a day where you celebrate his birth and all the sort of 14 swapna, which means dreams, because his mum had all of these dreams about his birth as well.
yeah,
Now, usually, because it's the lunar calendar, and this year, because as I mentioned, when we were coordinating this, Paryushan was a little bit later than it normally is, and I only finished fasting last weekend. Normally it falls on my birthday as well, so it makes it slightly challenging for me to have my birthday. I do remember one year, on the particular Mahavir Jayanti, and this was ironically my 21st birthday. I went to temple, but then I also went out with friends to the pub, and I had water at the pub. I came back home only to discover my dad had actually bought the Mavir's. It's like a swing thing, the Hitchcock. He's bought it
yeah,
home, and you're meant to stay up all night, like swinging it. So I get home to like my house to find half the north area Oshwal community, because nobody like it being so busy that I hadn't looked at my phone, nobody had really messaged me, and I suddenly was like, what on earth is going on? Why is the community here on my birthday? Suddenly to discover my dad had actually bought the hitchcock. So then after having been out until sort of 9:30, 10, got home to see we had to sort of stay up overnight in turns to do the hitchcock.
Yeah.
And I think so there's that. But then also with work, as you said, as a finance director, sometimes there are urgent deadlines, and I think this is where you can see a really sort of diverse community, because if the company really does practice what it preaches on DEI, it's not just that you'll be working from home, but they will recognize that, you know, there will have to be some flexibility in deadlines, because you need to be able to break the fast. So meetings need to be able to finish slightly earlier. You also, if work needs to be done, because I've worked in startups as well, where it's like, we just need those numbers. I don't care if you need to work. And I think that's where it's told me it's not the right environment for me, because we know, in marketing, it's not quite as diverse as it needs to be. So sometimes, even though they're talking about it, when the reality kicks in, meetings aren't able to be finished earlier, or there isn't the consideration on flexibility of work. So I think that would be something that I would say that we in Marcoms could particularly learn from, just to sort of say,
Yeah.
whether it's for Ramadan, whether it's for, around Navratri, or whether it's for Jainism, all of these festivals have some sort of fasting. But if we can just accommodate it's not an infinite period, it's a very short space of time,
Yeah.
but just to sort of accommodate these beliefs. I mean, also just going back to Jainism, obviously Mahatma Gandhi was from Gujarat as well, and there's a big
Correct.
Jain community in sort of Gujarat and Rajasthan. And he used fasting as a means for his non-violent protest as well. And I think there was a big, he's even acknowledged there was a big Jain influence in what he was doing there. So the salt marches, the protests that they were doing, it was all non-violent. And I think that's where the sort of spirituality and the fasting sort of all comes together.
That's very true, and that's very fascinating. How do you manage those energy levels during the fasting period? Because it wasn't until like I asked my mum really when the fasting occurs, especially in Hinduism, you can't have salt, but you can have nuts and you can have fruit while you're fasting. And I asked her, why is it just that you can't have salt? And obviously, you have to be vegetarian. So, why is salt a particularly interesting point? And do you actually know the reason for that, Nimi?
I actually do not know the reason for that one,
So,
actually.
basically, it's scientific. So, salt essentially sodium levels in the body. When you intake salt, it reduces the sodium levels in the body. Therefore, essentially, the water retention of the body is reduced. And it's basically a method to detoxify the body. So, not only are there religious aspects to why you eat certain kind of food, but there are actually scientific benefits and health benefits as to why we do certain fasts and why we do fast for a reason during certain periods of time.
I know, and I'd heard this story. I don't know if it's true as well, where somebody said, in theory, and this is what the Jainism has spoken about. It's really your body only needs one meal a day, one proper
Correct.
meal a day. You don't need three. The other two are just excesses. But I think, I don't have a heavy breakfast. My lunch is intermittent. So actually, ironically, we're doing the opposite to what the French recommend. And I actually think the French have got it right. Whereas actually the start of your day should start with the heavier one. We just don't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
And then, Jainism talks a lot about having baths as well. I mean, if you go to like in Jainism, we've got a couple of special specific religious places in India as well, like Samatsika or particularly Balitara. Now, I didn't make it Samatsika when my family went because, unfortunately, I had A levels going on at the time. But I have been to Balitara, which is like 3,000 steps, and you go up there. But
Yeah.
when you go there, you see all the sadhus, and they're sweeping all the or sadhvijis, they're sweeping the floor in front of them even before they walk, because it's like the non-violent stuff. Now, I think, to that extent, it's about, as you said, the sodium level. So it's about the spirituality, but it's the body as well. So it's it's the mind and the body being healed at the same time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And how do you manage those energy levels?
I think the first day is the toughest. So what I will probably do is the day before I will have a meal quite late at night, and then I will gradually. So the first day I might have my meal maybe about 3:34, and then gradually evolve it towards 4:30. Now, if it falls in the August time frame, it means daylight is still slightly later, so I can go
Yeah.
even up to 6 o'clock sometimes. But also, you don't want to be wolfing down your food because it's like, that's your one time period. So I think it's just, you gradually make it later and later, but as far as sunset can go. But I think in terms of it, it's, you're not going to be running a marathon during that time, so your exercise levels, going to the gym might decrease, but then actually at the same time we're still doing raska. So I think that's where, the mind overcomes the body. You have natural reserves anyway, and it's just pulling into those reserves, so you'll then almost rebalance yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I used to observe Shravan
Yeah.
Mass, which is the fifth month of the Hindu calendar. Many years ago, I used to basically abstain from eating meat during the whole month. But as I've got older, I probably have been a bit lapse as a Hindu and haven't been observing it as I should. But there are certain periods during, for example, like the 9 days of Navratri. There's other people that basically fast during Navratri, and when they have the prasad is basically when they eat the first time that day.
Yeah. Yeah, and like for me, potatoes, giving up potatoes is quite hard because, like I said, you don't have root vegetables. So,
Correct.
I not having chips or whatever on your birthdays,
Yeah.
that's when you're going out for a meal. So it's very good. That's where I was saying the detox part of it. But I think also in that sort of sense, um, you go back to the nuts, the fruits, all the basics. So you're almost going back to the sort of raw vegetable diet to an
Yeah.
extent.
So when you fast, are you able to eat the fruits and the nuts, or is it you
It's
aren't
just within
eating
that, whatever
anything
you
at
have
all?
during that one meal. So you can have your fruits and nuts during that one meal, but it is only what you sit down and eat during that one meal. The rest of the time, it is just water, or that's the way
Yeah.
we practice it.
Okay.
Different people have different interpretations. Like
Correct.
Jainism is very, a lot of people do it differently. And there's no, if you can't do it, if for physical or sort of well-being purposes you can't do it, there's no strict onus. It's just do what you can. And I know I will struggle with the 8 days of not eating at all, but
Yeah.
some of my cousins, a lot of people have done it.
Yeah, and I think the same goes in Hinduism as well. Like for those that are medically unfit, they tend to do it or don't do it. It's up to them. It's up to the individual, essentially, and how they interpret it. Because there are, like, for example, like myself, that abstain from eating meat or fish or eggs during certain periods. But then there's others that eat once a day, or those that have nuts and fruit. And it's up to each person's interpretation. So it's actually amazing to hear how you're able to integrate such a demanding spiritual practice into your professional life.
I mean, twice I've been during Barisha, I've been in America, once for work and once when I was at university.
Yeah,
That was a very interesting experience because trying to maintain a because I was there for work purposes, or I was there because I spent my second year of university out in the States.
yeah,
Trying to maintain that diet, I almost was practically fasting, like not
yeah,
eating for 8 days. I literally almost had salads.
yeah, I
So
can
because in
imagine.
America, like, because everything is so spaced out, to try and get to a Jain friendly vegetarian restaurant is
That must have been
not the
difficult.
easiest thing in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, I spent about 4.5 years in America, went to university there, so I definitely understand that point of view. Yeah, definitely difficult to get places in America. So, how do you find that fasting influenced your work in other ways? So, for example, like how did you approach decision making or integrating with colleagues, and how did fasting help you with making decisions at work?
So I think this is where I almost go back to, you can see which employers practice what they preach in
Yeah,
terms of diversity, because I think the red flags are shown in terms of how accommodating a company is to somebody who is fasting, in terms of, finishing meetings on a timely basis, saying, what do you need while you're fasting?
yeah,
That is where I think, because with seniority, the expectations are higher. But like, as I've said, with Paryusha, it is 1 week. And also usually in August. August, as we know in Adland, is not the busiest time. So if you really can't accommodate that, then you've got a serious, serious issue. So I
yeah,
think this is where it's like, if a company can be accommodating, if they finish meetings early, if they can say what you need, if they can recognize that deadlines can be a little bit more flexible, I think that's where it is. Because as I said, even with seniority, it's 1 week. It is
yeah.
literally 1 week.
I totally get that. And that is something that I have experienced throughout my career. And I have spoken across the companies that I've worked with to explain kind of fasting at certain periods. Is it easier to have meetings earlier in the day because I'll be more exhausted and kind of hungry and out of energy towards the end of the day? And sometimes, like during Navratri, I need to head off early because at the time my mum and dad were organizing local Navratri as part of community where I lived, and basically going over and helping them with getting set up and getting ready for each event, because it's literally 9 nights in a row. So that covers weekdays and weekends.
Yeah,
Weekends are a lot more
exactly.
easier, Friday, Saturday, but the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and even Sunday, a lot more difficult to deal with because obviously it starts at something like 7 p.m., ends at 12, 1 a.m., 12 midnight, 1 a.m. By the time you get home, go to sleep, you've got to get up for work the next day. So very mentally draining and exhausting, but obviously spiritually rewarding. Yeah,
Just to add to that, when we talk about the mind and soul, it's like
yeah,
if you're already stressed, then the fasting aggravates it. But if you're in a sort of environment which is accommodating, actually you really do rebalance yourself. And then when you get to September, you're actually sort of all geared up to be like rearing to go, even 110%, because your body's rebalanced itself, your mind has rebalanced itself. You've been in a company that's accommodated your needs.
yeah,
And you, like, as we know, the last quarter is when clients are doing new budgets. So all finance people are all hands on deck to try and do the new year's budgets, working with the account leads, trying to see what their clients are doing. It's almost like it's a spring, it's a new spring almost.
yeah, completely agree.
Mhm.
And with you and fasting, has it been something you have grown up with? Was it introduced by family, or is it something that you've developed out your own interest?
I mean, I didn't do it when I was very young. But my family's members of it have always done it to some extent.
Okay,
I think it
likewise.
probably started from my teens, but it's just carried on. I mean, everyone who knows me knows I almost interpret, because there are so many interpretations of Jainism, because it's so old. And with these books which were originally written in Sanskrit,
Yeah,
there's a lot of different people who interpret it in different ways.
correct.
So I'm a spiritual person. I'm maybe not the most devout Jain in maybe the strictest sense. Like during the rest of the year, as I said, I eat root vegetables. But I think it's the ethos and it's the spirituality that I think is really, really important for me. And so I will interpret it in the way that suits me. And I think even from my family, you might get a slightly different opinion, but it's all about sort of being treating others how you yourself want to be treated. And I think that's the fundamental point.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, you know, I have a different perception of Hinduism to my parents.
Hmm.
My daughter has a different perception of Hinduism to me. So,
Yeah.
do you think you've noticed any differences in fasting practices amongst the different generations within your family?
Um, Not amongst the different generations, because actually, almost immediate family have always just done this whole no root vegetables, no eggs, but having one meal a day. But then actually, my grandfather, my uncle, and even some of my cousins have done the no meal a day. So I think
Yeah,
the way it's been done, I think it's very, very similar. So I think it's more about interpretation of the religious practices, because there was this one thing where even before you do the Ras Gurba, there's a whole pratikama that goes on.
yeah,
And traditionally, there's this whole ceremony which actually a lot of people struggle to understand. I don't even fully understand it until I did the English version. And there's a lot of sitting down, getting up, using the murpati and all these other things. It took a while to understand what all of these meant. But historically, there was this theory that if you sneezed, because Jainism is so devout on like not killing germs and stuff, that you'd have to restart the whole pratikama. Now, this pratikama is not a short ceremony, so
yeah.
I
No, it's
always
not.
had this fear that I'll go to a pratikama, I'd sneeze, they'd have to restart it, and we'll be still there doing it in the next morning.
Yeah. So, with that, have you encountered any other misconceptions about the fasting from people that are in the Jain community and even outside? And how have you kind of addressed those?
I mean, I've just taken it. I haven't tried to address it inside the community, because I was like, you either do it or you don't do it.
Yeah,
And even outside of a community, I don't want to be preaching it. It's just saying, listen, this is something personal to me. I hope we
yeah,
can accommodate it. That's the only thing. I'm not going to sort of force myself on you to say, I'm not going to work full stop all day. It's just, I just need to finish a bit earlier. My energy levels will be a little bit less. A few other things. It also hits my birthday, so I'm going to
yeah.
celebrate my birthday either before or after it happens. So it usually won't be on my birthday, but it's just little things, nothing big. I think sort of people who are amenable to listen will listen. You have two ears and one mouth for a reason, as my grandma often says. And
Yeah.
I will try and respect that. I don't always follow it, but I will try and respect that. But it's just like, you know, listen to what people are saying, respect the way they want to practice it and the beliefs they have behind it. But I don't think preaching will help, because, you want it or you don't. You can help them
That's a
understand
fair
it and
point.
understand where your perspective is coming from, but you can't just say, well, I'm doing it, so you should be doing it as well.
That's a fair point. But do you not think then the fasting element of what you're doing to be essentially a conversation starter to essentially educate others about Jainism or South Asian cultural practices in general?
So, I mean, I think there's the whole, like we said, you celebrate it. So there's the Ras Gurba, and a lot of people know about what that is about. Um, I think in terms of celebrating it, I would rather than the fasting element, I think the non-violent principles, especially for
Yeah.
Jainism, especially at the moment, I think there's a lot that could be learned from that. Especially with everything that's going on. It's like, we all sort of, the people, my as I said, my grandfather, he was around when Mahatma Gandhi was around. He saw people going on assault marches because it was the same state.
Yeah.
He worked in Kenya during what I call the sort of, the lunatic express, when they were building those railway lines in Kenya. And
Yes.
it's almost more sort of talking about, despite all of those hardships, he sort of didn't bear animosity to people. So I think, it's more about sort of educating people about sort of the spiritual side of that, sort of balancing yourself. And so, as I said, even if people may be trying to harm you, it's kind of like turning the other cheek. I think that's the phrase I would say.
That's
And I think
interesting
and the
observation.
fasting helps you balance with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
Well, it's great to hear that you've had a positive experience, especially discussing how you go about your fasting
Mhm.
and how you interact with others.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, I want to ask, what advice do you have to give someone who's
Yeah.
trying to maintain their religious or cultural practices whilst navigating their demanding career?
I think just sort of talk to people, help them try and understand where it's coming from, plan around it as much as you can. There may be urgent and like I said, even where I've been in accommodating places, but there has just been urgent work,
Yeah,
after Parishan, after whatever, I might switch on my laptop at 11 o'clock at night if I know that I've got to get something done. But it would just be, sort of like from 4:30 to maybe sort of 9:30 or something, I've stopped working, but I might just switch on my 11 o'clock. So it's just the planning, the accommodation. But I mean, hopefully, it's very, very rare that something is that urgent that it needs to even be done at 11 o'clock at night. But you're still a professional. You're not going to
yeah,
sort of leave a company in the lurch for that. So I think it's just meeting them part of the way when it's urgent, but just saying, look, it will only be on the urgent situations, because for me it's only for a week. So on the once every few years, there may be 1 or 2 days that something is urgent. Sure, fine, I'll do it. And nothing is that urgent. And I'll work until 4:30. I'll work solidly. I'll probably take a 5-minute lunch break, because everyone needs a bit of a break. But it will just mean that I'm doing constricted hours, if that makes sense.
yeah. That makes complete sense.
Hmm.
Well, that's wonderful advice, Nimmi. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me, Kunal.
You're welcome. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desi Matters. We hope you have found this discussion as enlightening as I did. Fasting, as we've heard today, is much more than just abstaining from food. It's a powerful tool for spiritual growth, self discipline, and even professional development. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Join us next time as we continue to delve into the issues that matter to the South Asian community. Until next time, I'm Kunal Patel, and this is Desi Matters.